Thanks again for joining us today. My name is Sarah Hill, and I'm with Target and the Target Accelerators team. Today in this session, yay, hi Jane, we can see you and you look fantastic. Today we're going to be talking about the broader topic that has been discussed today at Retail Innovation Week of retailing with purpose, innovation, and social impact. And I am joined today with some lovely, fabulous friends and colleagues of mine and startup founders, Ashley and Chantel of Limeloop, and Jane of To The Market. So thank you, ladies, so much for joining. We're going to kick off by having them each do kind of an brief overview of their companies and their startups that they've founded, and then we'll dive into a discussion and Q&A, and would love for the audience to chime in with questions and comments. And just really, I think I was very inspired by the discussions this morning, and really want you guys to be able to have interactions with the founders, because I have had a lot of time with them and think we can have a fantastic discussion, but I want to make this collaborative. So one thing I do want to point out before we kick things off is that in the Hop-In platform, on the right-hand side, you'll see that there's a chat feature, but just make sure that you're toggled to the session tab. Otherwise, if you're asking questions, that'll go to the event. So like I think the stage or something like that. So they may not know what you're talking about if you're referencing one of our really funny jokes or very entertaining things that we're saying. Okay, awesome. Well, let's just kick this off. So I'm super excited to introduce you and everybody that's on today to Limeloop, who was in the most recent Target Technology Accelerator program that was not this year, we're already in 2021. In 2020, they participated in the first virtual program. They have an incredible company that is focusing on smart, reusable shipping containers. I'll let them kind of dive into that. But I'm so pleased to know Ashley and Chantel, and they have blown up, winning like all of the pitch competitions and all of the awards, because there is tremendous demand for what they're working on. And I'm super excited to turn it over to them to kind of give you a quick overview. Do you ladies want to take it over?
Great. Thank you so much for having us, Sarah. So we thought we'd just give you a little bit overview of what we're working on in the industry, and then really excited to open it up for Q&A after Jane gives you a little more information as well. So we really look at Limeloop as the IoT solution for sustainable e-commerce shipping logistics, or a lot of ways in other sense, about time for shipping that makes sense. So you imagine like us, you probably shop online and your home is starting to look like this on probably a good day. And this is really a result of logistics, technology, and packaging. As many of us know, were designed over 150 years ago, and yet we were still working inside this box. And this has resulted for many in high costs for inventory and packaging loss. Environmental impacts are on the rise and increasing, and our consumer LTV is decreasing. So we've really developed Limeloop as a solution to start thinking outside the box, or the way we look at it is an all-in-one platform for e-commerce brands to really tap in and start to gain visibility, security, and predictive analytics for their full e-commerce supply chain. And so we really look at that as simplified logistics that starts with, at a simple level, reusable shippers and engagement trackers. And the way it works today is that if you're a retailer shipping e-commerce goods, we will ship those shippers to your fulfillment center, and then you can pack the package similar to how you do today, slip a return label on the outside, unzip our package, and then start to put items within that package. We also include a prepaid return label that allows the consumer to send it back to you via USPS and to be reused over 200 more times. We've been working primarily with apparel and expanding into new categories as we start to look at more structured goods.
So knowing that we have packaging that lasts as long as ours does, it really lends itself nicely to creating a technology solution that also enhances that experience for the customer and the brand. And we look at that in a couple of ways. So visibility, so having up-to-the-minute location tracking for our orders. Security, we look at that in terms of both port piracy, temperature monitoring, and breakage, and by monitoring the environment in and around the shipper every step of the way. And then environmental impact, so easily monitoring how decisions and helping our brands make decisions to reuse directly and how that impacts their environmental savings. And as a result, we've seen about an average about a 41% savings to our brands compared to conventional packaging, and a 93% savings on resources for each journey that our package makes. So we'd love to have you guys join us in thinking outside the box for a smarter future.
I love it. Right, my house, like right by my front door, there's just tons of boxes. There's a treadmill box right now that's massive that has other boxes in it. It's like Inception Boxville. Anyway, I'm super excited to dive in. Please feel free, everybody, to kind of jot your questions down now as I introduce Jane, who is the founder and CEO of To the Market and author of the book Buy the Change You Want to See, which I was rereading some snippets and looking at my book that has been on my nightstand and victim to coffee spills for quite a while now. And it was so insightful last night, and even this morning listening to some of the speakers of the topics that were mentioned about transparency and some small changes that can be made, and what you kind of wrote about in your book, Jane. So I'm super thrilled to have you today to talk about To the Market, and as well as your book. But Jane was also a participant in the Techstars program at Target in 2019, so a few years ago, and she has developed To the Market, which is a platform solution for ethical manufacturing and sourcing of apparel, accessories, and home goods. And she's been recognized also, similarly to Limeloop, by many different publications, but recently has been recognized by Fortune as one of the world's greatest leaders in the pandemic, which, if you look at the other people that are on the list, we're honored to be in your presence, Jane. Truthfully, I say that in a joking manner because we spent a lot of time together in Minneapolis, but truthfully, the things that you're working on are remarkable. But I'll turn it over to you to give an overview of yourself and To the Market and Buy the Change You Want to See.
Well, thanks for having me, Sarah, and it's great to see you, and so impressive to hear about Limeloop. I'm really excited to dig in. That was a great presentation. Thanks, everybody, for joining our session. I thought I'd just give a little bit of background about myself and about To the Market, and then we can sort of move on into questions. So I started To the Market very accidentally. I was working in a totally different sector. I actually worked for the US government and national security, and that meant I was spending a lot of time in the developing world and on the ground in the developing world. And one of the things I noticed was that there was tremendous untapped production capacity for suppliers who were making ethical apparel, accessories, home goods, etc., that just weren't making it to the global market. Meaning these were organizations that were setting up, they were producing product in a way that was fundamentally better for people and better for the planet. So that means they may be paying significantly higher wages than potentially what market rate is. They may be making real efforts to reduce their water, sort of water usage or carbon emissions. But ultimately, these suppliers really weren't a part of the global supply chain at scale. And when I began to peel back the onion as to why that was, because I looked at so many of the statistics around consumer demand and interest in sustainability from millennials and Gen Z in particular, which combined represent the largest purchasing power in the history of the world, I really realized that part of the reason why these better for people, better for the planet suppliers were not making it into the global marketplace was that, much like logistics, which is, just as Ashley and Chantal mentioned, a very, very old industry that is really hampered by legacy systems, so is the retail manufacturing space. So many of the biggest brands, retailers, and corporations around the world, including particularly in the United States, have been using the same retail brokers who have factory network that tends to be decades old. They tend to be factories that were built in a way where you were producing for somebody like Sears, where you were having like millions of units of the same type of product, and you had years or long months to produce that and see it over. And fundamentally, that's just not what the retail landscape looks like anymore. You have retailers, brands, consumers, not only who are asking for better story, better material, really feeling like the brands that they wear have to be reflective of their values. But you also have a desire for faster turnaround time, lower units, fewer, fewer units and more types of product to deliver to that consumer. And so, long story short, the outdated model of being reliant on these old brokers and their factories that have these questionable environmental and social footprints is not the future of retail. And so I then set out to create a new way of sourcing and manufacturing that was better for people and better for the planet, with the mission of making it easy for retailers, brands, corporations to access all of these better for people, better for the planet suppliers around the world who are operating in a way that is reflective of what I think the future generation is looking for in products. And fundamentally, our thesis is retail, meaning apparel, accessories, home goods. This is all going to look more and more like the food and beverage industry, where we as consumers are getting smarter and smarter about country of origin, about how a product is made, about the materials or ingredients in that product. And then we're beginning to have more sort of explicit preferences around what we like to see in that product. And so To The Market is setting out to make it easy for these brands, retailers, and corporations to appeal to the next generation of consumers by accessing these better for people, better for the planet suppliers all over the world.
So incredible. I love it. And I think I feel like you telling the story of To The Market and how you started this journey, it's could fold in what Chantal and Ashley are working on so well that it just it makes so much sense for you guys to be having this conversation together, which it makes me very happy. Ashley and Chantal, do you guys want to give a little bit of background of your experience and what led you to start Limeloop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think really just an addiction to building, which led inevitably to a love for growing companies. And for some reason or another, a love for logistics. I love a good challenge. And so from early on, had been working on a company through college that was in logistics and worked on multiple others, and just really started looking at not only how technology could really scale and innovate logistics and shift a 150-year-old industry, but really taking a passion for sustainability and social impact, and really looking at how you could take technology to really innovate on the full supply chain. And it just kind of serendipitously happened that I had developed this reusable shipper 10 years ago and was unpacking boxes and came across it. And it was at this time of doing a lot of research on the trends of e-commerce and what the next 10, 20 years really look like. And as we started to dive deeper, knowing that as at the time, e-commerce was only 10% of retail, we're getting closer to 20%, but knowing that that was such a minor part and this problem will continue to rise. So it was really just this passion for marrying these skills of a love for logistics and technology, but really looking at how I wanted to leave a future for every generation, for my son, and how we really make a more positive impact with our skills.
I love that. The thing that I always get surprised by is that the way in which you guys talk about this is it seems so simple. You identify an opportunity. I think, Jane, you experienced a lot of these opportunities kind of firsthand of saying, there are people that are making these ethically sourced products, and actually kind of similarly with you of there's a better way to do this. Just do it. And I think that's where I'm probably biased too, of when I see your guys' solutions, and there's a subset of people that are working to bring these into different retailers across the globe, even of it makes so much sense. But then I think the tail end of that is so much more challenging than just, making a change overnight. But Chantal, do you want to give a little bit of background on kind of your passion for why you started with Limeloop?
Sure. Yeah. So my background's actually in software engineering, so a technologist by trade, and so just love systems thinking, finding solutions. Prior to that, in a former life, I did a year of AmeriCorps out of college and really just fell in love with technology that helped people and that made sense and had great impact. And so Limeloop was very serendipitous in that way of bringing together this desire to leverage technology and continue to use the skill that I developed, but doing it in a way that really makes impact at scale. I grew up in New York, lived in the Bay Area, so I know what it means to kind of roll something out in a big way and what it looks like when a lot of people get involved in something as opposed to individually. And so the idea of taking something as analog and as ubiquitous as a box and taking that into the future. And then at a very personal level, I online shop way too much. And so kind of finding a solution that not only helps myself, but that has become a problem. And to your point about how it seems so simple, I think one of the things that happened with e-commerce, it kind of sprung up overnight if you think about it in terms of kind of the bigger, longer history of shopping and retail. And so suddenly it became a problem where you get a box here and there, you didn't even think about it. And this holiday season, I was with my parents quarantining, and if you would have seen the stacks of boxes getting delivered for everyone ordering gifts for each other and things like that. So which even 3 years ago would not have been the picture of my parents' home at all. And so to think of that happening across America, then around the world, just really opened your eyes to the need for a new solution.
That's, such a good point. And even thinking about how I think the US in particular kind of took for granted our recycling options that we had for such a long time. And then now all of a sudden, you're also very close to this topic. Now all of a sudden that's not there, like the impact that we're having on the world is just astronomical. And so I think that's even more of a reason for having not forcing these conversations, but really making it imperatives for organizations to start to adopt. Feel free to hop in here at any point. And my brain is going in like 30,000 different directions because I'm like, oh, we could talk about all these things and the trash and all this stuff. But I think one thing that I kind of put in the chat a little while ago is this aspect of transparency that both of you, I mean, at the kind of core of what you're doing are, solving for organizations and large retailers that hasn't necessarily been a trend in retail and a lot of large organizations. And I was thinking about this earlier today when a lot of like the events of 2020 were brought up of, things were changed because of, George Floyd's murder and I mean, all of these different political situations that our country endured. But I think consumers are now more than ever demanding transparency. Do you think there's kind of like an aspect that retailers aren't prepared for to give them that full set of transparency? I think retailers as well as other kind of Fortune 500 companies. Jane, do you want to start?
I think, there's a couple of things that are happening that's forcing a desire or a sort of a requirement for more transparency. One is regulation. And when Rana Plaza took place in Bangladesh, which was this sort of huge building that had a number of factories in it that collapsed, it really brought sort of the world's attention to how products are made. Many people didn't understand how the products that we enjoyed are actually made, how many hands touch them, how complicated it is to create something as basic as a t-shirt. I remember when I traveled to, I can't remember if it was Vietnam or Nicaragua, and I was learning how to make a pair of jeans. This is some of my work with VF Corporation, which owns Wrangler and Timberland and North Face. And I remember learning how many tens of hands touch a single basic pair of jeans, and was blown away by how complicated the production of a product is that somehow we have figured out, for, I would say, not for the best of the world, to price at things like $20 or $15, which when you see all of the work that goes into it, it's sort of mind blowing to process that we're able to achieve such cost efficiencies. And then you ask yourself, well, what has to happen for that cost efficiency to be passed on to the consumer? So I think, you have increased regulation to help to mitigate some of the exploitation that has taken place in the supply chain for decades and decades. You have labor exploitation that's taken place in the cut and sew space, in the sort of raw material sourcing. So that would be sort of like the farming of cotton, for example. And then you have a generation or multiple generations at this point of people who have grown up with, I love talking about this example because you know, Sarah, how much I love pizza. You have a generation like me who grows up ordering pizza on an app and being able to see when my Domino's pizza or Papa John's pizza goes into the oven, when someone is like checking it for quality and when it's getting on the car. And yet you have buyers who are placing multi-million-dollar orders for product that have less visibility than I do into my pizza. And that to us is sort of unacceptable. And so we then ask ourselves, how can it be that, you know, that I'm not able to better understand where my product is in production, you know, where it is in QC and logistics, whatever that might be. And so that is then forcing many brands, retailers, and corporations to invest heavily into these new solutions, which is such a critical part. And then ultimately consumers similarly are saying, you know, gosh, now that I better understand how products are being made and what the implications are of things like fast fashion, how can I be a part of the solution, and how can being a part of that solution be reflective of my values? This Gen Z and millennial sort of cohort are very focused on sort of value signaling. That's sort of how they demonstrate sort of themselves. It's how they sort of reflect on themselves, the same way that previous generations might say, oh, I'm most excited about a good deal. Or another generation would say, I'm most excited if it has a name brand on it. The millennial and Gen Z generations are most excited about being reflective of brands that reflect their values. So all
part of like their identity.
Yeah, are helping to contribute to drive more transparency in the supply chain.
Amazing.
Yeah, I love that pizza example. I might have to steal that one. And it's the same thing that we're seeing in a lot of reasons that we're really leveraging the technology for Limeloop, where not only is the expectation there, as you mentioned, Sarah, but it's to the point now where, you know, if anyone who works in customer service can tell you, the tracking numbers for carriers is just not enough anymore. We talk about literal transparency in terms of where is my product in the ecosystem, but that's the standard right now because it's the only thing available. And so to your question about whether or not it's about kind of not wanting to show what's going on, I think it's more about not having the information to be able to relay to the consumers. And so the brands themselves might not have all of the resources that go into making that pair of jeans. The brands themselves don't have any more visibility in that last mile of where that package is getting delivered. And so you can't provide something that you don't have. And so I think it's a partnership that has to happen between, you know, resources and companies like ours that kind of have that information. And also it is a little bit more of kind of opening the blinds behind the doors for some of these companies to kind of let people peek in and see what's going on. Because the truth of the matter is, whether it's the Gen Zers or other generations, you just cannot survive not being the brand that's not being that open and not being that transparent, because they will go find someone else.
Yeah, and that's like, to bring it up a level, we always talk about that. To make that change from an executive level, it must come from a KPI perspective. So it's constantly looked at, and then how you communicate that externally, because knowing these intricate logistics systems, it just doesn't happen overnight. So I think it's this honesty also as a team saying, here's where we are and here's where we're going and here's what we're working towards. And then being very transparent with your team internally as well. I think the transparency works as a twofold to actually make the true change.
Double transparency.
Sure.
Transparency about the transparency and how we're working to get there. I think that applies to so much of the topics too of, you know, that were discussed today at hand of, I think, you know, whether it be sustainability or racial equality or, you know, what have you, like people want to know. I don't think anybody was like, we expect a change today and to tell us exactly how you're going to do it, but acknowledge what you're doing and we'll be with you on the path. So, but at least show us what effort is being done to make some changes.
Yeah, and then I think actions speak louder than words. Chantal and I talk a lot about, you've got to love when you're sitting there listening to someone in corporate talk about sustainability and they reach for the table and they drink a plastic bottle and then their water and then they set it down. So it takes change on, I think, so many different levels, and awareness and action is a huge one.
I love that. There is a question in the chat for Limeloop about providing Katie is asking, is Limeloop able to provide details on shipments using any carrier?
Yeah, so we're completely carrier agnostic, both in the design of our shippers as well as the technology platform for tracking them.
Awesome. And keep the comments coming. David, couldn't agree more. with some of your comments about plastics bags and boxes and all of those things. Only escalating as e-commerce transactions are also increasing and all of that. So
yeah, because the transparency on that side even goes to the other end, where before Limeloop, I couldn't really tell you what happened to a recycled box or bottle, what happens after it goes into that bin. And part of that is for us to educate ourselves about what these systems are, so that it's not a fallback answer to be like, well, I recycle, so isn't that enough? And it's like, well, let me tell you a little bit about what happens when you recycle. And so that full system and the circular economy really includes every part of it when it comes to those kind of packages.
I love it. I think you're kind of bringing up all of these things that remind me a little bit about kind of what you were mentioning in your book, Jane, of the small steps that you can take, and then kind of to Ashley, your comment of, meeting with somebody that works in sustainability and watching them drink out of a plastic water bottle or, what have you. I'd love to hear from your guys' perspective. What are some of the things that you're doing right now to your leaders, your recognized leaders in this space, your purposes and mission statements for your companies are to be embedding this. How are you continuing to lead your own companies and the people on your teams? What are some of the best practices that you guys have realized along your journeys? Ashley, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, I think going back to what I was saying, for us, it's a KPI level at first for us, and then the rest of the team. So it's always top of mind. It's something that we just build the company around, and there's no question about it. And then that second part, it is such a large impact that the only way that it's truly going to change is collaborations. So collaborations internally, but especially externally, and how we continue to partner, knowing that it's less about competition at this point, and it's more just how we continue to work together to make a larger change within e-commerce and retail as a whole. I think from a sustainability perspective, but also from a social impact. And then I think the last is what I mentioned earlier, which is actions speak louder than words. So you can talk about it as long as you want, but action is where we're truly going to make that impact. So really, creating that culture amongst your own team, but also your customers, and continuing to listen to your customers, but then acting on it. And I think that's where we'll start to see some shift.
And just to add to that, and I was doing a talk with some business students recently, and the question was about, being an impact-focused company, how do you balance decisions with finances? And to piggyback off of what Ashley was saying, when you have that core tenet of values and kind of the mission that you're working against, it becomes a no-brainer, right? Like, you just kind of measure everything against those set of core values. And then if it doesn't work out financially, it doesn't matter, because it's what the core values are. They're non-negotiables. And when you think about that externally, it's about meeting people where they are, right? We know that we're a change in behavior to return a package when you're used to throwing it in the garbage pail, and understanding that takes time for people to get used to that. And how can we work with them to not only make that an option, but make that the better alternative to how they're currently doing things. And so, and knowing that there's a ripple effect, right? So you learn how to return a Limeloop shipper, and then all of a sudden you start thinking about all the other single-use things that you're using in your life and how you could cut back on that. And so we love to be that kind of little seed in people's brain as to how do I change this behavior across the board for other things. I know that's personally happened for me, where since starting Limeloop, I see single use everywhere now, and I'm that person that's like, do you want a reusable water bottle? Do you want, I'm doing that for everyone now. So how do we kind of be that seed for other folks as well?
Awesome. And Jane, I know that you and I share a mutual love of coffee, and that was one of your examples, I think, in your book of this is a small change that you can make that has a big impact. And I think you used an analogy of having an IV drip. I also have just multiple cups of coffee. I have currently 2 on my desk, just in case one tips or something, but would love to hear your thoughts too.
Well, I think building on what Ashley was saying about KPIs, I think the core piece there is measurability, right? So really being able to demonstrate how sustainability, and for us, we are sort of dual focused. We have a sustainability focus, and we have a focus on the dignity of work. So we do a lot of tracking, not only on things like water reduction or carbon emissions, but also on things like number of hours of work created, number of women employed. But all of that is only strengthened through qualitative and quantitative feedback. Mm-hmm. And so making sure that you have a sort of a mechanism by which you can capture that information, I think, is really critical. because it then demonstrates, gosh, if over the course of 2021, you are able to source organic cotton shirts versus conventional cotton shirts, collectively, what is the impact that you're able to have by making that choice? And that then makes it much more compelling. And it makes it compelling, I think, for particularly folks who may not fully understand why sustainability or ethical labor matters. And it's not until you can say, hey, Hilton, who's one of our clients, by sourcing your conference bags through to the market in organic cotton versus conventional cotton, you were able to save X amount of, gallons of water and reduce your carbon emission for what this product would be by X amount. And you're then able to go and communicate that information to consumers, to investors around ESG, internally to help employees feel like they're a part of an organization that is taking commitment seriously. And so the measurement piece, I think, is hypercritical. And then figuring out, what you're going to measure and how that water falls into every part of your business is critical. So if our focus is around, for example, better materials, we have to look at not just, okay, we're using organic cotton, but that also means, what are our tags made out of? What are our threads made out of? There's so many pieces that one could look at as it relates to how far you want to push your sort of sustainability or your sort of ethical labor. And so deciding what your scope is and then how you're going to measure it, I think is critical to get people on board, and then, to help also keep yourself accountable that you're making progress.
That is so phenomenal. I think what you brought up too is so important of that, just like the report on progress of going for progress over perfection and in working towards that goal. I want to talk a little bit about kind of that aspect of being able, because both of your companies are able to provide your own respective customers, which are retailers or other corporations, insights and KPIs that then could be leveraged for something like a corporate responsibility report. And I think back to when I was in undergrad, like Nike was one of the first companies that had come out and said, here's our corporate responsibility report, and here are some very bold goals. I don't remember at the time what they were. I could probably look them up, but it was like, we're going to be carbon neutral by a certain date. And it was like, they were the one of the first companies to do it. I'm aware of other ones, I'm sure there were, but weren't as large as Nike. And I think that was a really bold statement, and they were a leader. And we have since seen, Target puts out a corporate responsibility report that everybody should go check out. We report on some things, but a lot of organizations are putting out corporate responsibility reports. And I think just touching on what I would love your guys' thoughts on just that notion and how that's evolved over the years. Because I think what you're talking about too, of like this action and the KPIs and the reporting on progress is even more critical now, or the consumers are expecting that now. But have you guys helped organizations, probably maybe smaller ones than Target or Hilton, to help them understand how they can take your insights and your data and integrate them into their own kind of performance reporting? Ashley, do you want to start with that one? Sorry, I keep starting with you.
No, it's okay. I'll let Chantal take this one. She works a lot on the technology side of how we actually make that change and work with our customers.
Perfect.
Yeah, so on kind of a couple different sides. So that transparency, it's a huge aspect for us. And going back to kind of what I was saying, that people just don't know. You might know in a literal sense how many boxes you use, but kind of what does that mean in terms of the production oil, water? What does it look like in terms of the carbon emissions for transporting that? That's not going to be known by an individual brand. And so that's kind of where some of those numbers come in for us. And it's kind of twofold. I think what you're talking about in terms of putting out those numbers is an important step, but people want to know kind of what the next step is. And it's an interesting thing when you talk about something as specific as packaging, because the consumers see that. So there's no hiding from it. So you can talk about the resources you want to save, but when it's literally to the consumer, it's a much harder thing to hide behind what happens when you hit that year goal that you mentioned before. And so I think, again, going back to that transparency piece is being able to put out and also going back to the action speaks louder than words, what are you actually doing to get there? And how are you updating people? And it can't be enough that the press release of the announcement is not the action, that's the first step of many that needs to happen, keeping everyone on the loop along the way.
Yeah, I think about the example that we used about the shift in recyclables of like, I feel like that was like a huge, I mean, that's a gigantic change for the United States and other countries, the entire world actually. And it wasn't really discussed too much about like, hey, how, like, I think maybe now consumers should be more inclined to say, this changed. What are organizations going to be doing about it? And maybe there were, it just wasn't as loud as maybe I would expect it to be. But yeah.
Sure, yeah. Because similar to that, I mean, greenwashing was probably a word that no one even knew what that meant 5 years ago. And now consumers are smart and they recognize and they'll call it out immediately if they don't think that is genuine and there's actions behind it. And so it's almost counter to that message that you're putting out there if you're not immediately following up those announcements with how you're going to get there and the measurements of success along the way. Or failures too, knowing that it's not going to happen overnight. And there might be things that you tried and didn't work out, and let's educate because let's do this together and get there faster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I think it goes back to what Jane was saying was like never stop asking questions. You know, you just can't put out a report and then just leave it there. And you know what Nike did, it's just like you always have to ask, where's that material coming? What is this process? Why are we doing it this way? Because if you constantly ask questions, then you'll really, truly, I think, see that shift and that change of, I think, what these big visions that we set out to actually accomplish. Because data is only so much. The data, you know, you can tell a story any way you want, but it really comes back to how is that improving over time.
Awesome. One thing I want to touch on, and I think there's been a handful of different comments that you guys have made in terms of like the KPIs and the metrics and like all of these things. I think especially, and this is kind of like preaching in the choir here, that everybody that's on this call has some interest in this topic, but I'm going to try to make this like not accusatory of different people. But I think what is surprising to me a lot of times is thinking about the startups that I've worked with coming into Target, even before working at Target at ASU, working with companies that were, you know, titled, you know, for or social focused companies versus just like, they're all companies for profit or nonprofit, you know, but why would you kind of designate this as like with a purpose? Don't all companies have a purpose? But an aspect that I found that a lot of people have given feedback on companies that I've seen, I think actually both of yours get feedback on, is like, oh, let's understand the economics of this and how is the economics of this going to work? And it has nothing to do with your business models. It has nothing to do with, but I think it has to do with this connotation that, oh, a company that's leading with purpose maybe isn't leading with the business model. And I think that that's really interesting. It reminds me a lot too of what you talk about in the book, Jean, of like if you think about labor standards in other countries, or if you think about different, like, we don't ask about the economics of different, like when Target raised their wage to $15 an hour, there's a reason to do that. It's like we should be paying people in a more appropriate living wage. We should be doing these things. So it's interesting to me that when we talk about purpose-driven companies, that I think a lot of times people are questioning like, oh, well, do the economics make sense here? Like, well, maybe it costs more to produce a more sustainable bag or organic cotton, but here's the impact. So we'd love to just kind of hear your thoughts on kind of that concept of the economics of purpose-driven companies.
Yeah, we had this incredible opportunity to work with the C-suite team during the Target Accelerator. And I think the CFO summed it up the best. He goes, you know, Ashley, it's not about the P&L and the bottom line and comparing, you know, package to package or technology to technology. It's all about the story that it tells at the end of the day and what we're actually really trying to accomplish. And it's something that is so refreshing, and I feel is what we need to carry forward as we grow companies.
I love that.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think part of it too is also looking at the longer term effect. I think what's happening is that people are trying to map it one-to-one to something that makes sense in their head. And that's why it's really easy to fall back on, well, let me see the numbers really quickly. And some of the changes, especially when you talk about impact, you might not see that tomorrow or this year. And it's really about a long-term look at what that means over time and what that looks like, not only in terms of loss, dollar to dollar, but when we talk about the next generation, where it's like it will lose you customers, it will lose you return customers. And so it's not really a question of if, it's when. And so I don't really think you have the option to continue to kind of think in that kind of way, knowing that the longer term effects of that on your brand and your business is already being seen today.
I love that.
Yeah, I think this is a really fascinating topic because it is, I think companies that are tagged with being purpose-driven, just as you said, it can be like a pejorative term in the venture community, because the assumption is that you may have founders who are driven by non-financial outcomes, and therefore that negatively impacts the sort of trajectory of the business. I think there's also like perhaps a false assumption that they're like therefore not core business people. They are, activists, or they're, whatever fill in the blank term you wanted to use. And I think there's also this false assumption that you can't have a outsized outcome by investing in social impact companies. And I think that's like patently false.
For sure.
I think that if you look at comparable companies that have invested in environmental social governance, and you compare that to like pretty similar companies that have not done that, these are sort of publicly traded examples that one could compare. So, for example, if I'm thinking of like Method soap versus maybe a more traditional soap on the market, somebody like a Method, the multiple that they are able to command in their valuation and their growth trajectory compared to a comparable sort of traditional provider of, let's say, soap, I mean, it's sort of one's going up and one's going down. It's very, very clear in the multiples that somebody like a Method is able to achieve because of their social focus versus, again, a more traditional soap. I mean, that is apples and oranges. And so I think once there is space for investment and room for sort of proof of concept, I think many of these investors come around and realize that this is a core to the value proposition of the business, and this is ultimately a competitive advantage. It's not a sort of sandbag that will be a detriment to the growth of the business. It is, in fact, a core competitive advantage. Where I think we have to get to is a place where you can get over that initial sort of hurdle. Getting these companies through the pre-seed and seed rounds, I think, are the hardest, because they initially, I think many investors see it on the surface and they say, this is social impact, and therefore, I'm going to have a 5x return, not a 10x return. But if you're able to get through those pre-seed and seed rounds and prove the marketability of the business, then I think many investors sort of come around and realize that, again, the sustainability element, or whatever part of your sort of quote social purpose to the business, tends to be what makes that business a winning business.
And I think to your point earlier, I mean, all of your points earlier, is that people, consumers, guests, have more affinity and loyalty to brands that they feel are part of their identity. I mean, like you said, it really is a part of their identity, who they shop from, who they purchase from, and what they're wearing, and kind of this ethos behind it is part of their identity. And I think that like trend is kind of just starting to be realized, of like people that are purchasing Method or, a purpose-driven company are so much more likely to purchase that again, and other products or lines that get launched in the future.
And I think what I would say to anyone who hasn't sort of come around to this belief that having a focus, regardless of what your company looks like, on the environment or the way that you sort of employ people or the way that you govern your company, this is very quickly moving from a nice to have to a need to have. Mm-hmm. And if you want to attract the best talent, the next generation of talent, if you want to attract the next generation of investors, you need to start making these changes now, because this is the way that, again, millennials and Gen Zs are wired to look for these things. And if they don't see them showing up, they're not investing. They're not joining your company. Like, they're not buying from your company. And so, I think it's sort of like make the change or suffer the consequences in the next 5 to 10 years. I know it sounds so tough, but it's, you look at things that were once acceptable and everyone sort of banged the drum and said, look, this is problematic. This is problematic. And you get to a place where suddenly the way of doing business is like viewed as toxic. And so I just, and I'm not an activist. I'm a capitalist. I'm reflecting on what I am seeing in the market and where I am seeing money go, where I am seeing talent go, where I'm seeing energy and passion go. And that is around, how do I spend my time on this planet in a way where I'm working for a business that not only is meeting a need, right? So it's not just like I'm making really pretty headbands, but not only is meeting, which is great too.
They are
to be clear, love headbands. Not only is meeting a need, meaning the product is great, the quality is great, the shipments arrive on time. Like, you, at the core of it, like, it has to, the business has to function well, but it has to be reflective of what the world is looking for more and more and more.
What I find to be even more remarkable, like, I couldn't agree plus thousanding to what all of your comments, Jane. But what I find to be even more remarkable is that the capabilities and technologies that both Limeloop into the market are offering are like a white label solution. So you're offering technologies and capabilities for retailers and others, but for them to show up and look as though, so these other organizations are able to offer their guests and consumers these options. So it's not just hey, we understand where the guests, millennials, Gen Zs are going in the future, but we're going to enable other organizations to benefit off of these capabilities that you guys are building. So I think that's even more compelling.
And I think to Jane's point, then, it's how you allocate capital, because capital is very powerful. So it's less segmenting and saying, okay, we have capital for sustainability, we have capital for social, we have capital for women. It's capital for great teams of all, and then it is capital for just building great companies. And great companies, the future is just being redefined by the next generation, which is really exciting.
Such a great point, and not to beat a dead horse, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, we have to move, the pools of capital that are allocated for these hyper specific segments. My argument to them is that's a great start, and now it needs to be part of your mainstream thesis. Like the female founder funds, the minority funds, the sustainability funds. No, this is a great start, but this would be core to the thesis of all of the investing that you're doing, because it is the future, not because it's the right thing to do, but because this is the future.
I think so. There's a couple of questions in the chat. David just said amen, which I want to read that one, but we'll get to the questions. And if not, we'll put our emails in the chat at the end of the session so that we can definitely address all the questions. But that is an excellent opportunity to kind of pivot to some of the other questions and topics that were discussed today around diversity and inclusion. And I have been on a journey, I think, with each and every one of you through the program and the tech program at Target, but kind of the interesting social dynamics, or actually really terrible social dynamics that exist, I think, talking about this VC aspect. And some of just, I think what really resonated today and what you guys are saying is this representation aspect of, I think diversity and inclusion is particularly probably the most grim, and Chantal, we can talk about this specifically for like Black women in tech. And so like having representation for diverse people in technology in general, but I think Black women in tech specifically is really challenging. I think that social focus, I mean, if you look at what we were just talking about, you're checking all the boxes, girlfriend. So like, I think, how are we continuing? And I know that there's been a lot of progress and a lot of commitments being made, but how are we, what is critical to ensure the success of a lot of these commitments that have been made, I think the latter part of last year and going forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of things that we touched on already, and again, not to be over repetitive, but it's setting up those KPIs and sticking to them. And so what I like to talk to people about when they come to me and say, like, I can't find any Black female engineers, and we've been trying, like, well, what do you do if you don't hit your sales mark in a quarter? What do you do if you don't hit your new company growth? A lot of people will make changes, they add new hires, they might fire some folks, they might do a lot of different things to make sure that those KPIs are met. None of those things seem to happen when you don't reach the kind of diversity goals that you go through. You might hire a new person in D&I and put it on them and say, good luck. You might talk about it in different ways, but they're not held to the same level of requirements that a lot of other KPIs are. So if you don't treat it as a paramount important thing in your company, like anything else in your life, something that doesn't get the time and the energy is not going to see the fruition come from it. And so just putting it on the same, if it's that important to you, put it on the same standard that you would any other missed goals and missed opportunities that you have at a company-wide level, and make the change that you need to actually hit those markers the way that you would with anything else. And I think kind of to backtrack from that is really exploring why diversity and inclusion is important to you. And if you can't rattle off answers to that immediately, like you really need to take a step back and really think about that question. And are you doing it because you need to look better in the public eye, or is it something that's really cool? You think it's and believe and understand is core to your business? And I think that really helped to up level the importance that you put behind the actions that you do to change that in your company.
The accountability aspect, I think, is so critical. Is that you're so right? Like nobody, I mean, a lot of organizations and people within those organizations haven't been held accountable, or it's like, there's these false promises of, well, we're working on that, we're developing these programs, we're committing capital, but what does that actually mean? And to your point, what happens if you don't hit those goals? Mm-hmm. Somebody spoke earlier today. I wrote his name down, and I'll have to go look at where it was, with love. Something in his company had love, the word love in it. But he was saying that like there has to be incentive, just like, I mean, I think on the other side of the accountability of like, if people, will they lose their jobs if they don't? But also, what is the incentive for people to have a change in behavior? You have to have some change somewhere, like either an incentive or the counter to that. So I couldn't agree more with you, Chantal.
Yeah, I would like to give the example.
Sarah, right?
What's it?
Oftel from Conspiracy of Love.
Yes, exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, he's great.
He was wonderful.
Yeah, I tend to give the example that if I'm hiring for a software engineer, it's not acceptable for me to come back to ask and be like, well, I couldn't find a software engineer, so I hired a communications team. Like you can't, it's not a completely interchangeable. So you kind of have to put the work behind it and stick to those goals.
So true. Okay, we have another question here from Alpesh. How do you see the circular economy strategy in implementing this? Sorry, I feel like I'm reading this weird. How do you see the circular economy strategy in implementing this across businesses?
Yeah, I think it goes back to a lot of what we've been talking about, measurement being a large one in that, and then capital allocation. I think even with internal teams, you probably could look at a P&L and a budget and see where allocation is going. And I think that goes back to data always tells the story. So constantly looking at that and asking questions, well, why is it allocated this way? Why are we moving in this direction when our objectives and goals say we're actually moving in this? So I love data, so I think that's why I always come back to it. But if you constantly always go back to what you're truly seeing and then collaborate with others, there are incredible software development companies that are out there right now who are working on a lot of these tools to be able to have this streamlined measurement. So I think it's less about coming to the table with problems and starting to truly come to the table with solutions.
I love that. I'm going to address a question that I think is a really great point from Sabrina in the chat, mentioning or asking, have you seen large companies successfully merge hyper-focused capital pools into larger pools? I agree with the sentiment, but I haven't seen this happen particularly with large public companies. Sabrina, I think this is a really excellent point, and something that I noticed or was particularly astute to in a lot of the capital commitments that were made in late last year of, we're going to allocate X million dollars to supporting Black founded companies or what have you. And it seemed like there was a lot of Fortune 500 companies or, regardless of whoever it was, allocating this money, but not yet kind of, not to be expected, not yet kind of having a plan of how they're going to approach solving these problems. And I think that there's so many retailers, that exist. There's so many banks that exist. And if everybody starts putting together kind of the same plan, you start to beg the question of like, is it really being appropriated or is it really being allocated appropriately? Instead, what we're starting to see actually, and I have seen this with organizations like 1863 and a few others, that people are realizing that there's power in the collaboration between, the different stakeholders. So Google has something to offer a lot different, they're a lot positioned a lot differently in the market than what Target would have to offer. And we should be providing startups and, any other initiative that we're working on, something a little bit unique. So we're starting to see it, but I definitely think that there's a lot more room for opportunity there. Have you guys experienced similar things in the spaces that you're working in?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on this topic for hours, so I'll keep it short and sweet. I think there's a pure disconnect of talking about having funds for it and how it's actually dispersed. And I feel that there's a disconnect from, the people who are sitting there at the table and then maybe actually having an entrepreneur at the table and truly talking through how you actually get what Jane was saying past the pre-seed stage to the seed stage. And I think a lot of this money has been allocated for de-risk. So companies that are much further along, that are showing the revenue, that make you feel comfortable. But the only way we're going to make true change is that you take high risk. So starting with a high risk level and then going even deeper and really having a smart strategic way about how you disperse that money, smart but quick, so that we can see change, because we are so far behind. We should have seen this yesterday. And so to actually be able to make that, shift, we need to look at it differently than how we've seen capital allocation structures in the past.
Yeah, and to add to that, and Jane hit on this before, is also what does it mean when you separate out that funds? What does that mean for the core allocation that you're doing? Is it kind of giving you a passage to continue working as you're working on the core funding, but then have this allocation separated that covers you for kind of your allocation for the year without actually, because I obviously agree that because of the disparation between those numbers, more is needed to even bring it to a place of equity. But if you're doing that while also not making any changes to the way that you're operating your core business on a day-to-day, then it's a temporary band-aid at best. That's not going to get us anywhere near to that equity that we need.
I would say to answer Sabrina's question, the closest sort of parallel I've seen as it relates to like a more focused, let's say, portfolio that has then been expanded into sort of the broader portfolio would be, banks or large PE shops or large financial institutions who have maybe had specific funds that won't invest in oil and gas. And then over time, that's then been, I think, brought to the entire fund in many cases. So that is, I think, an example of where you've seen something that there used to be a carve out, and now it's become much broader in that mandate that there isn't that investment in the oil and gas. It'll be interesting to see again if that gets copied and pasted into other sectors. I'm certain that there are other sectors like that, like not investing in tobacco or other types of or liquor even, where investors have just decided that that's not going to be a space that they are going to deploy capital into, and it's usually started as a carve out and then been sort of expanded into the entire fund mandate. But it's just to even build on what Chantal was saying. I do, there's sort of this pro and con of having a carve out. The pro of having a carve out is that you're specifically setting aside capital to make available, perhaps to types of business theses or types of founders that traditionally have been overlooked and under sort of engaged. And that's a start. I think, just as what Chantal was saying, the challenge then becomes is, what does that mean for, just as you said, the rest of your portfolio? And that can even mean we find that we have clients who come to us and say, we want to pursue sustainability, so we're going to start with an organic capsule, like a capsule collection, which is, a great start. But then my question to them is always like, is your intent to then roll this out to the rest of your assortment? Because it's, what is the sort of opportunity to make change? Is this sort of like you're checking a box with, a sort of small piece of your sort of financial commitments? Or is this something that you're really interested in making mainstream, where it's not even worthy of a call out? It's not, I hope that we get to a time sooner rather than later where, and I'm so glad to have female founder friends, but where it's not like a thing to be like, and she's a female founder.
Right.
I'm just a founder. So I think it'll be, it'll be interesting to see how we take, how this all sort of crosses the chasm, how we take what is an anomaly and make it mainstream.
I love that. It makes my heart is growing by the second that we're on the call. So I do want to call out the time, because I know that we had planned for about an hour session. I think that there's so much good dialogue. I think we've got about almost 30 people on the line. So happy to continue to the discussion. And I could, like I mentioned, I could talk to you ladies like for 3 days straight. But I think also want to be mindful that if you guys have to drop, more than welcome to do that. And we can follow up with questions as well. One of the things I think might be fascinating for the group on here to know is somebody asked, when can we start to receive Target or other large retail orders shipped in Limeloop packaging? I think the same question can be posed for to the market goods as well. I think it would be awesome to hear kind of some of the use cases and things that you're working on. A lot of times we try not to give details. I think that Limeloop is going to be in the same boat of contract commitments with any retailer or any organization, but I think we can talk about roadmaps and what to expect and some timing.
Yeah, we always say that the biggest change comes from you. So by you just telling Target that you want it yesterday makes the biggest change, and telling your friends to tell their friends, and that alone, they listen. I think that is the thing I've grown to love about Target, is they genuinely care about their customer. So if the customer demands it, it will become a priority for them. So tell them that you want it. And there are other ways that we're working on in great partnerships that you will start to see Limeloop shippers, and really excited to announce that kind of further into this year.
Follow them on social media and you can stay up to date. Swipe up and up. No, sorry. I think that really is a great way, because you guys are great about posting some of the cool things that you're up to. Sorry, go ahead, Jean.
We have opportunity right now to service all sorts of accounts. So you could see to the market product in everything from a Burlington and Nordstrom Rack to a Bloomingdale's and many places in between. But again, I think money talks. And so if you are committed to sustainability and to ensuring that the products that you're buying and using are reflective of the values you likely believe in, I encourage you to search out brands and retailers that are really taking the time to ensure that their products are respecting the planet and empowering people in the process.
I love that. When Jane was in the tech cohort in Minneapolis in the headquarters, she had like a bunch of products. Actually, I was going to say a little bit, but it was actually a lot of products in the accelerator space, and was doing some photo shoots with it. And I think you were going to a market or something, but the product that you had, I specifically and still remember to this day, like these animals. I think they were like African animals, zebra, or there. I definitely remember
We were
giraffe.
launching the Lion King with Bloomingdale's.
That's- Okay,
So
with
Disney and
Bloomingdale's.
Bloomingdale's were re-releasing the live Lion King, so we were sourcing all their product from all across Africa. So we had product from all across sub-Saharan Africa, samples arriving into the space in Minneapolis. Yeah.
It was, and it looked like it belonged in Bloomingdale's, not to anything other than it was like so beautiful, and like I wanted all of them, including your headbands and all of the other things that you had in the space. And maybe one day you can order to the market goods in a Limeloop shipper, and then we'll just be like in this total, my heart will have just imploded. This is super exciting. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I think that discussion is so important. It's the things that we're talking about now. I hope that in 5 years, looking back on this discussion, it's like, I can't believe people talked about those things one day or like years ago. So I think you guys are ahead of the curve, and I'm so excited to see what's to come. Please keep us posted on your progress through your social channels and everything else. And I am excited to continue working with each of you through with Target. And so hopefully you'll see some future partnership announcements or something like that coming from both of us.
Likewise,
Thank you so much.
Sarah, it's been an inspiring conversation.